Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's tale begins, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. Now, close your eyes, get comfortable, and let's drift into the unknown together. I was in 8th grade when this happened, and even now it feels strange to say that out loud. Some memories fade with time, but this one has stayed sharp in a way that almost feels intentional, like my mind refuses to soften the edges. It centers around my favorite teacher, a woman who stepped into my life at exactly the moment I needed someone steady, and the unimaginable way her story ended. That year was already hard before I ever stepped into her classroom. My family had just moved from California to Vermont, and the change felt enormous in every possible way. Everything was quieter, colder, and unfamiliar. I didn't know anyone, and I wasn't the kind of kid who could just walk up to strangers and start talking. I carried my nervousness like armor, except instead of protecting me, it made me look distant. Most kids assumed I didn't talk at all. Some of them genuinely thought I was mute. I didn't correct them. It felt easier to disappear than to explain myself. Homeroom was the one place that didn't feel suffocating, and that was entirely because of her. From the very beginning, she noticed me in a way that wasn't intrusive. She didn't force conversations or put me on the spot. Instead, she made small gestures that slowly chipped away at my fear. A quiet check-in after class, a warm smile when I walked in, casual questions that felt safe to answer. She had a way of making you feel like you mattered without making a big show of it. Over time, I started talking more. I laughed in class. I answered questions. School stopped feeling like a battlefield and started feeling like a place I could actually exist. She had this natural warmth that extended beyond her students. She talked about her family often, especially her son. He was her foster son at the time, and she spoke about him with unmistakable pride. She would share little updates, how he was adjusting, something funny, he said, a milestone he reached. You could hear the love in her voice. Eventually, she adopted him, and I remember how happy she was. She talked about it like her family had become whole. It felt genuine, like she had opened her home and heart completely. Her daughter was in my grade. We weren't close, but I saw her often. She carried a permanent edge like she was annoyed at the world. She rarely smiled, and conversations with her were short and tense. I didn't think much of it at the time. Teenagers go through phases, and I figured she was just one of those people who preferred to keep their guard up. Her son, on the other hand, ran in social circles connected to my sister, who was a year ahead of me. He spent a lot of time with her friends. From the beginning, my sister said something about him felt off. Not in a dramatic way, just a quiet discomfort she couldn't fully explain. He would say things that didn't land right. His humor was strange and sometimes unsettling. He had bursts of energy that didn't match the situation, like he was playing by rules no one else understood. One moment in particular stuck with my sister. They were crossing a bridge on their way to school, walking in a loose group and talking about nothing important. Without warning, he grabbed her arm, lifted her, and held her over the side of the bridge. The river rushed beneath them. She said her heart dropped so fast she couldn't even scream. He laughed, not nervously, not apologetically, just laughed like it was harmless fun. After a few seconds that must have felt like forever, he pulled her back onto solid ground. The group awkwardly brushed it off. Someone made a joke. Everyone pretended it was nothing. But my sister came home shaken. Even then, she couldn't explain exactly why it scared her so much. It wasn't just the act. It was the energy behind it. Life moved on the way it always does. Freshman year came. New classes, new routines, the illusion of starting over. But I stayed in touch with my old teacher. She was one of those people you didn't just forget. I'd stop by to say hi, send occasional emails, talk to her when I needed advice. She still treated me with the same kindness she always had. Talking to her felt grounding, like stepping into a familiar room after a long day. Then came the morning that split everything into before and after. School started normally enough. The halls buzzed with the usual noise, lockers slamming, people half awake, the smell of cheap cafeteria coffee. But something felt wrong almost immediately. Teachers weren't chatting or joking like they usually did. Their faces were tight. Conversations stopped when students got close. Within minutes, staff began ushering everyone toward the auditorium. No explanation, just quiet urgency. We filled the seats in a confused murmur, hundreds of students whispering theories. A fire drill, a schedule change? Nobody knew. The principal walked onto the stage and the room slowly quieted. He looked like he hadn't slept. His voice, when he spoke, was heavy in a way that made my stomach twist. He told us that a beloved teacher had passed away that morning. Then he said she had been killed. The words didn't land right away. They floated in the air, unreal. My brain tried to reject them, not her. That didn't make sense. People like her didn't die violently. They were supposed to exist in a protected space in your memory. Safe, warm, permanent. When the realization hit, it was like something collapsed inside me. I couldn't breathe properly. Around me, reactions exploded. Shock, whispers, disbelief. And then, unbelievably, some kids started making jokes. Nervous laughter, insensitive comments, the kind of cruel humor teenagers sometimes use to distance themselves from pain. Each sound felt like a slap. I sat there crying openly, unable to stop. It wasn't quiet tears either. It was the kind of grief that forces its way out. School was dismissed early. The halls felt hollow, like the building itself understood something terrible had happened. Outside, clusters of students traded information in hushed voices. That's when I heard the details. That morning, she had woken up like any other day. She made breakfast. She sat at her kitchen table working on a crossword puzzle. A simple, peaceful routine. Her son approached her from behind. Without warning, he shot her in the back of the head. No argument. No struggle. Just a sudden, irreversible act. Afterward, he and his sister fled in her car. Authorities later said they had been planning it for months. Months. That detail haunted me. The idea that while she was teaching, laughing, encouraging students, there was a secret plan unfolding inside her own home. A betrayal so intimate, it felt impossible to comprehend. I kept replaying memories, her smile, her pride when she talked about him, trying to reconcile them with what he had done. There was no bridge between those two realities. They existed side by side, refusing to make sense. Grief mixed with something darker, disbelief, anger, and a deep unease that settled into my bones. I thought about my sister's story on the bridge. The strange behavior, the laughter that didn't match the moment. It all took on a new weight. Not because it explained anything, violence is never that simple, but because hindsight has a way of rearranging memories into patterns you wish you'd never seen. The days that followed blurred together. Memorials, counseling sessions, and teachers speaking through tears. The school felt like a community holding its breath. Everyone had a story about her, a moment when she had been kind, patient, unexpectedly funny. Hearing those stories only reinforced how much light she brought into people's lives. Years passed, but the memory never softened. It didn't become easier. It just became familiar. Occasionally, I would think about her and feel that same sharp ache. Recently, I learned that her son's legal case finally reached full conviction years after the crime. Seeing his photo attached to the article was jarring. He looked older, changed by time, but the knowledge of what he had done overshadowed everything else. I couldn't stare at the image for long. It felt like looking directly at a fracture in reality. What stays with me most isn't just the violence, it's the contrast. A woman who devoted herself to helping others, who reached out to a scared, quiet kid and made school feel safe, was taken in the place she should have been safest. The randomness and cruelty of that fact still shake me. Yet when I think of her now, I try to hold on to the version of her that shaped my life. The teacher who saw a silent kid and decided they were worth the effort. The woman who believed fiercely in the people she loved. Her story doesn't end with the tragedy, even if that's how the world remembers it. For those of us who knew her, her kindness is the louder memory. And maybe that's the only way to carry something this heavy. By refusing to let the darkest moment define the entire story. We were coming back across open water when everything changed. The mission itself had already felt unreal. We'd delivered something important, something we weren't allowed to talk about, and the mood on the ship was strange because of it. Not celebratory, not tense, just quiet. Like everyone sensed, we were part of something bigger than ourselves, but didn't yet understand what that meant. Orders were orders, you did your job, and you sailed home. The night was calm when it happened. Too calm. The kind sailors learned to distrust. The sea rolled gently, black and endless under the stars. Most of the crew was settling in. Some men were talking softly, others half asleep in their bunks. The ship hummed with the steady rhythm of engines doing what engines have always done, carrying men through darkness toward whatever waited next. Then came the impact. There wasn't time to process the first explosion before the second tore through us. The ship shuddered like a living thing in pain. Metal screamed, lights flickered, men were thrown from their feet. For a moment, confusion ruled. Shouts, alarms, boots pounding on steel. And beneath it all, the unmistakable feeling that the vessel was dying. Training kicks in during moments like that. You don't think in sentences. You react. Get topside. Help whoever you can. Move. The deck tilted underfoot. Water already claiming spaces it didn't belong. Some men prayed, some cursed. Some moved in stunned silence. Fear makes people honest. The ship didn't linger. 12 minutes is nothing when you measure time in heartbeats. One moment we were aboard a warship. The next, we were in the ocean, scattered under a sky that didn't care what had just happened. The vessel slipped beneath the surface with a sound I'll never forget, a deep, final groan, and then it was gone. 1,100 men entered the water that night. At first, survival felt simple. Stay afloat, stay together, call out for friends. The ocean was warm, almost gentle, betraying no hint of what was coming. We clung to debris, life jackets, each other. Voices filled the darkness, roll calls, reassurances, questions no one could answer. Somewhere, someone laughed nervously. It didn't last long. We didn't see the first shark immediately. About half an hour passed before someone whispered the word. It traveled through the group like a current. You don't mistake the shape. Even in low light, the silhouette cuts cleanly through the water. Oh, a dorsal fin slicing the surface. A presence older than fear itself. It circled. Then another appeared. At dawn, the ocean revealed what the night had hidden. Fins glided in lazy arcs around us. The water that had felt endless now felt crowded. Men drew closer together instinctively. We formed tight clusters, shoulder to shoulder, believing proximity meant safety. Someone compared it to old battlefield formations, soldiers standing firm against a charge. The logic was simple. If a shark approached, the nearest man would fight back. Pound the water, shout, create chaos. Sometimes that worked, sometimes it didn't. There's a moment when a predator decides. You see it in the way it moves, a subtle shift, a line drawn between circling and committing. When a shark locks onto you, the world narrows. Its eyes are wrong. That's the only way to describe them. Black, empty, unreadable. They don't reflect fear or anger or hunger. They reflect nothing. It's like staring into a space where life should be and finding only instinct. When it strikes, the ocean erupts. Screams carry differently over water. They rise sharp and desperate, cutting through every other sound. The surface churns red, and men who were there a second ago are suddenly not. Sometimes there's thrashing. Sometimes there's only silence and widening ripples. You keep pounding the water anyway. You keep shouting. You convince yourself noise matters. You convince yourself it might choose someone else. By the end of the first morning, the reality settled in. We weren't waiting to be rescued. We were enduring something ancient and indifferent. The sharks didn't rush. They didn't frenzy all at once. They worked patiently, circling back, picking moments. Hours stretched into something shapeless. Sunlight burned overhead. Thirst gnawed. Muscles cramped. Men drifted in and out of awareness. We counted losses because counting was something we could control. Numbers gave structure to chaos. 6 an hour, someone estimated. The math felt obscene, but no one argued. The water told its own story. On the fourth morning, or maybe the fifth, time dissolves out there, I bumped into a friend. We'd been separated during the night. Seeing a familiar face sparked relief so sharp, it hurt. I reached out, calling his name. He didn't answer. His body bobbed strangely, tilted wrong. When I tried to steady him, the truth revealed itself in a way I still can't put into gentle words. The ocean had already taken what it wanted. What remained was a reminder that survival wasn't guaranteed, no matter how long you'd lasted. The days blurred into survival routines. Stay awake, keep floating, don't drift alone. Fight when you must. Hope without evidence. Fear became background noise, constant, exhausting, strangely normal. Then, sometime around midday, salvation appeared in the sky. At first, it was just a sound, distant, mechanical, almost imagined. Heads lifted, eyes squinted against the glare. A plane cut across the horizon, low and purposeful. For a moment, no one reacted. We'd been disappointed before by illusions, but the aircraft turned. It circled. It saw us. Energy surged through bodies that had nearly given up. Arms waved. Voices rose. Men who hadn't spoken in hours shouted until their throats burned. The plane dipped its wings. Acknowledgement. Proof. Rescue didn't happen instantly. It never does. Another aircraft arrived later, descending toward the water in a maneuver that felt impossibly delicate, given the chaos it was entering. When the hull touched down, hope solidified into something tangible. One by one, survivors were pulled from the sea. Strangely, that moment, waiting for my turn, was the most frightening of all. After days suspended between life and death, rescue felt unreal. The ocean still pressed against my chest. Sharks still circled at the edge of vision. The idea of letting go, of trusting solid hands to lift me free, required a final leap of faith I didn't know I had left. When I was finally hauled aboard, my body shook uncontrollably, not from cold, from release. Of the 1,100 men who entered the water, only a fraction emerged. The sea took the rest with the same indifference it shows storms and ships alike. Dates and numbers record the event neatly. History always does. But statistics can't carry the weight of voices lost. Friendships ended mid-sentence, or the sound of a calm ocean turning violent without warning. In the aftermath, people focused on the mission. Its significance overshadowed everything else. History remembers outcomes, not always the human cost carried in their wake. We were part of something enormous, something that reshaped the world. But out there, floating between sky and sea, the war felt very small. Survival felt like the only story that mattered. Even now, years later, certain sensations return without invitation. The slap of water against the hull, the sudden shadow beneath the surface, the sound of distant engines. Memory doesn't fade so much as it settles, waiting for the right moment to rise. What stays with me most isn't the terror, though there was plenty of that. It's the clarity. In those endless hours, stripped of comfort and certainty, life reduced itself to essentials. Hold on, stay together, keep breathing. Fear became familiar. Hope became discipline. We delivered something the world would never forget. But for those of us in the water, the memory that lingers is simpler. Men against an ocean, waiting to see who it would return. About 5 months ago, something happened that shook me and everyone around me in a way I'll never forget. At first, it seemed like a normal period in our lives, but then one small event spun into something that stayed with us long after it was over. My mom had a friend we all knew and cared about, a guy named Andres. He wasn't just a friend. He had become like part of our extended family in a way. Someone we greeted whenever he came by. Someone we trusted. Someone who brought his quiet presence into our home. He was originally from Venezuela, and like many others from his country, he came to Ecuador searching for better opportunities. As you might know, there are a lot of Venezuelans who have migrated here, trying to find stability and work so they can send money back to their families. When Andres first came here, things were tough for him, really tough. He ended up working as a driver of a Tricimoto. If you've never seen one, a Tricimoto is like a cab, but instead of a full car, it's a motorcycle with a little carriage behind it where passengers sit. It's loud, it's open to the elements, it's crowded, hot in the sun and cold at night. It pays very little, and most drivers like him barely make enough to cover food or rent, let alone save up for something like a new phone. So when his phone finally broke one day, he was stuck. And worse, that phone was the only way he could talk to his mom back in Venezuela. The only way he could hear her voice, watch her face on video calls, and reassure her that every day he was doing his best. Without it, he felt cut off from home, from comfort, from hope. For a while, my mom let him use her phone whenever he needed to call home, because she knew how hard it was on him. It was never a big deal, just a kindness. But then one day, everything took a strange turn. He came to my mom and said something that sounded odd at first. He said he'd been having weird dreams, dreams that felt different from normal dreams, dreams that felt like messages rather than just imagination. He looked serious, almost afraid, and asked if he could use my mom's phone to call his mom so he could tell her about the dreams directly. He said that his mother had this ability, something he believed deeply in. that she could interpret dreams and predict what they meant in someone's life. Some people in his family believed in dreams this way, that they held messages or warnings about the future. And he felt like he needed his mom to understand what he was going through. My mom, even though she didn't personally believe in dream interpretations, could see how anxious he was. And so she let him make the call right there in her living room. He dialed his mom's number, and after a few rings, he started telling her about these dreams that had been haunting him for days. He described them in the way he saw them, with details and emotion. And then he said something that made his mother's voice crack on the other end of the line. He told her that his dreams had been about shoes and a stab. I know it sounds strange to hear it written down, but that was exactly what he said. He tried to explain what he could remember, how the images came to him, how real they felt. His mom didn't laugh it off. She didn't tell him to relax. Instead, she said something that changed the tone of the whole conversation. She told him that dreams about knives, about being stabbed, often meant danger, even death. She told him to pray to God every day for mercy, that God would protect him because if these dreams were warnings, then he needed spiritual strength, not just hope. Andres listened quietly, nodded, and then ended the call with a heavy heart. My mom watched him after he hung up, and she said he looked pale, as though the words had drained color from his face. Even after that day, he didn't laugh it off or shrug it off like a silly dream. He talked about it a lot, more than normal. He wasn't sleeping well. He was tired, tense, like something was pressing down on him all the time. My mom tried to reassure him, tried to make him forget it, but he couldn't shake the feeling. Every time she saw him, his eyes looked distant, like he was still living in those dream moments instead of in the real world around us. Then, 3 days after that phone call, everything took a turn that no one expected. My mom's phone rang early in the morning, and on the other end was Andres's mother. She was crying so hard that my mom could barely understand her at first. Between sobs, she was asking if it was true that Andres was dead. His girlfriend, she said, had called her to tell her what happened. But she didn't know anything for sure. My mom was confused. She didn't know what to say because she hadn't heard from him since he had left that day. She told his mom that she didn't know anything, that she hadn't heard any news, but she could hear the fear and grief in the woman's voice. After that call, my mom started asking around, talking to people who saw him last, trying to piece together what had happened. What came out was something none of us wanted to hear. He had died the night before. He died while he was working, doing what he did every day to survive. The shock of it hit everyone hard. There was a house nearby with security cameras, and that footage captured the moment everything went wrong. What we learned from that video was horrifying. He was picking up passengers as usual in his Trissimoto, when suddenly 2 men approached his vehicle. They weren't there to ask directions or to say hello. They were robbers, trying to steal from the people he was carrying. Nobody knows exactly what triggered it, whether they demanded money or something else, but before anyone could react, the situation turned violent. Instead of running away or trying to save himself, Andres did something remarkable. He saw the fear in the passengers' eyes, saw the possibility that they could get hurt, and he chose to protect them. Even though he was unarmed and outnumbered, he stood up to those men. He tried to fight back, to push them away, to keep the danger focused on him and not on his passengers. It was a brave and selfless act in a moment of terror. But in that struggle, one of the assailants drew a knife and struck him. The blade hit him in the throat. His life ended right there, on the street, trying to defend strangers instead of himself. When word of his death spread, everyone was stunned. People who knew him, who saw him every day, couldn't believe it. It was sudden, violent, and so senseless. We all remembered the dreams he talked about, the fear in his eyes, the warning his mother gave him. And those details began to float together in our minds like pieces of a puzzle we couldn't put together. How could something that started as a strange dream end in such real, tragic death? Some people shook their heads and called it coincidence. Others felt the dreams were warning signs that he didn't understand until it was too late. In the aftermath of his death, days passed in a blur for all of us. We went to his funeral, stood with his girlfriend, tried to comfort his mother over the phone as she wept about her only son. We talked about how he always smiled, how he said he would go back home once he saved enough money, how he promised he would see his family again. None of that happened. And I remember thinking how fragile and unpredictable life is, how someone can go to work one day and never come back, and how a dream can feel so strange one moment and so tragic the next. Losing him made the stories about dreams and warnings feel heavier, like they weren't just random thoughts anymore. Some people started talking about fate. Some talked about the spiritual meaning of dreams. Others just saw it as a painful reminder that danger can come without warning. And though none of us can say for certain what dreams really mean, we all carry his memory with us. We remember Andres not as a dreamer, not as a victim, but as someone who chose to stand up for others until his last breath. When I was growing up, family life was complicated in ways that felt normal at the time because it was all I knew. My uncle had spent much of his adult life in and out of prison. Because of that, two of my cousins lived with my mother and me for long stretches. Our home became less like a temporary arrangement and more like a shared childhood. We fought like siblings, protected each other like siblings, and built the kind of bond that only comes from surviving chaos together. Back then, I didn't have the language to describe how unstable things really were. To us, it was just life. We attended a small private Christian school. It was the kind of place parents trusted without hesitation. Uniforms, strict teachers, morning prayers, and the unspoken assumption that everyone inside those walls was safe. Safety felt guaranteed simply because adults said it was. When you're young, you don't question those assurances. You accept them as truth. One afternoon, we were waiting to be picked up after school. It was routine. Kids gathered near the flagpole, scanning the parking lot for familiar cars. My cousins and I were joking around, restless and ready to go home. That's when a man approached us. He spoke calmly, confidently, like someone used to being obeyed. He told us our mom was working late and had sent him to pick us up. There was no immediate alarm. He said it so casually, with the tone of an adult running an errand. We were children, raised to trust authority, especially in a setting wrapped in religious reassurance. He didn't rush us or act suspiciously. He simply waited for us to follow. And we did. Looking back, that moment feels surreal. There was no dramatic tension, no instinctive warning bell. Just three kids believing what they were told, because that's what kids are taught to do. The drive was quiet. We assumed we were heading home. None of us noticed the unfamiliar turns until the surroundings changed. Buildings grew sparse, streets emptied. The man didn't speak much, and when he did, his voice stayed level, controlled. There was no anger, no impatience, just direction. When the car stopped, confusion replaced comfort. We weren't anywhere we recognized. Before we could process it, everything escalated quickly. The tone shifted from polite to absolute. We were led into a warehouse, cold, dim, echoing. Fear settled into my stomach like a weight. What followed is something that has lived inside us ever since. He's sealed away in a place we rarely visit, even in our own thoughts. We were restrained in a way that forced us to remain aware of everything happening around us. The adults in that space weren't frantic or chaotic. They were methodical. The air felt heavy with intent. My uncle was there. Seeing him, battered, terrified but alive, shattered any illusion that this was a misunderstanding. Time lost meaning. Fear stretched moments into something endless. My younger cousin cried uncontrollably, the sound cutting through the silence like a wound. The rest of us were frozen, caught between disbelief and the instinct to survive by staying quiet. The men spoke in measured tones, delivering what they framed as a lesson. Their words weren't shouted. That calmness made them feel more dangerous. They told us we were there to understand consequences, to see what happened when someone crossed lines they believed should never be crossed. Their message wasn't just for my uncle. It was for us. The atmosphere was surreal, like standing inside a nightmare where everything is too sharp, too real, and impossible to escape. Fear became something physical, pressing against my ribs, tightening my throat. I remember focusing on small details just to stay grounded. The smell of dust, the echo of footsteps, the cold air against my skin. When it was over, the room felt hollow, like sound itself had been drained. The men approached us again. Their voices returned to that unsettling calm. They warned us about silence, about debt, about futures we were never meant to step into. The threat wasn't loud. It was deliberate, spoken as fact rather than possibility. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. One of them untied us. His expression was unreadable. He told us to run, and we did. We didn't look back. Survival narrowed our world to a single goal: distance. Our feet pounded against pavement, lungs burning, minds struggling to catch up with reality. Somehow we made it back into a version of normal life, though nothing would ever feel normal again. In the days and weeks that followed, silence became our shared language. Adults asked questions we couldn't answer. Authorities circled in ways we didn't fully understand. But the core of what happened stayed locked inside the three of us. Not because we didn't want help, but because fear had rewritten the rules of our world. Speaking felt dangerous. Silence felt safer. And strangely, that silence bound us together. We didn't need to talk about it to know the others remembered. A glance, a pause, a shift in tone, we recognized the echoes in each other. Trauma became a quiet companion we carried collectively. Over time, that shared burden transformed into something unexpected. A fierce loyalty, an understanding deeper than words. People assume healing always involves confession, unpacking every memory until it loses its sting. For us, healing looked different. It was found in everyday moments, laughing too hard at stupid jokes, showing up for each other without explanation, knowing we were never alone in what we carried. There was a bitter irony layered onto everything. Around that time, my uncle's seventh wife had taken out a massive life insurance policy. The timing raised questions no one ever fully answered. She disappeared shortly after, along with the money. Rumors swirled, stories grew, but truth remained elusive. It became another chapter in a narrative already too tangled to unravel cleanly. Years passed. Childhood turned into adulthood. We built lives shaped in ways both visible and invisible by that day. Fear softened into vigilance. Silence turned into resilience. We learned to function, to love, to exist in a world that once felt violently unpredictable. We still don't talk about it in detail. Not because we've forgotten. Forgetting was never an option. But because our bond doesn't require words to validate what we survived, there's an unspoken agreement. We carry this together, and that is enough. Sometimes people ask why we're so close. We give surface answers: shared upbringing, family ties, inside jokes. The truth is deeper and quieter. We are connected by a moment that fractured our childhood and forced us to grow in ways children never should. And yet, within that fracture, we found something enduring. Not freedom from memory, but freedom from facing it alone. That, in its own strange way, is liberating. It was a little after 1 in the morning when I realized I'd taken a wrong turn. I was driving home through the quiet stretch of semi-rural Kentucky. I'd traveled 100 times before, but that night everything felt slightly unfamiliar. Roads looked different in the dark. Landmarks disappear. The world shrinks down to whatever your headlights touch. I wasn't worried at first, just mildly annoyed with myself for missing a turn. The road I chose seemed harmless enough. It was narrow, bordered by trees that leaned in like silent spectators. My tires hummed softly against the pavement as I followed the curve, expecting it to reconnect with the familiar route. Instead, the road kept stretching forward, growing darker and more isolated with every passing second. I remember glancing at my phone for navigation, but the signal flickered in and out. That's not unusual in rural areas, but it added to the feeling that I'd wandered somewhere I shouldn't have. I told myself it was fine. I'd find a turnaround soon enough. Then the pavement ended. The transition from road to gravel was sudden. The crunch beneath my tires echoed louder than it should have in the stillness. My headlights revealed a clearing ahead, not a driveway exactly, more like a dead end carved into the trees. And sitting there, angled slightly toward me, was a truck. It was old and dirty, the paint dulled by dust and wear. The truck looked like it belonged there, like it hadn't moved in a while. My instinct was to stop immediately, but momentum carried me forward just enough to make my presence obvious. A man stepped into the beam of my headlights. He hadn't been visible at first, and in one moment the clearing was empty except for the truck. The next, he was there, standing beside it like he'd materialized out of the darkness. He wasn't rushing. He didn't look surprised. He just turned his head slightly toward me, acknowledging that I had arrived. My stomach tightened. I rolled my window down halfway, enough to speak, but not enough to feel exposed. My voice sounded smaller than I intended when I called out an apology. I told him I'd taken a wrong turn and didn't mean to intrude. He walked a few slow steps closer. The gravel crunched under his boots in deliberate rhythm. There was no aggression in his posture, no raised voice, no threatening gestures. But something about his calmness unsettled me more than anger would have. He stopped just outside arm's reach, close enough that I could see his face in the glow of my headlights. His expression was neutral, not annoyed, not curious, just still. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady, carrying none of the awkward politeness I expected. There was no hesitation, no attempt at small talk. He looked directly at me and said, in the coldest, calmest tone I've ever heard, "You turn around and go home, honey." That was it. No explanation, no follow-up. Just a simple instruction delivered with absolute certainty. Something inside me reacted before my mind caught up. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed the same message: leave. As I shifted into reverse, my headlights swept across the back of his truck. The beam caught on something dark smeared across the tailgate. At first, my brain didn't register what I was seeing. Then the color resolved in my vision. Blood. Not dried, not faint. Thick, dark streaks that glistened wetly in the light. There was enough of it to leave no doubt about what it was. My breath caught in my throat. Time slowed in that strange way it does when fear sharpens your senses. I didn't stare long, maybe half a second, but it was enough to burn the image into my memory. The metallic smell didn't reach me, but my mind filled it in anyway. I forced myself not to panic. My car jerked slightly as I corrected my steering. The gravel shifted beneath the tires, and for one terrifying moment I imagined getting stuck. Imagined the engine dying. Imagined 100 things that would trap me there. But the car moved. I completed the turn as smoothly as I could manage, keeping my eyes forward. I didn't want to look back at him. I didn't want to confirm whether he was watching me leave. The urge to check the mirrors fought with the fear of seeing something I didn't want to see, so I didn't look. The moment my tires hit pavement again, I pressed the accelerator harder than I meant to. The trees blurred past, shadows stretching and collapsing in my peripheral vision. My heart pounded so loudly it felt like it filled the car. Only when I was several miles away did I let myself breathe. Logic crept in slowly, trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed. Rural Kentucky meant hunting. Deer were common, coyotes too. Plenty of trucks carried the aftermath of a successful hunt, and fresh blood wouldn't be unusual in that context. I repeated that explanation to myself like a mantra. It was probably a deer, probably just a hunter, probably nothing sinister. But the reassurance never fully settled, because it wasn't just the blood that lingered in my thoughts. It was him, his voice, the way he spoke with such calm authority, as if the situation was already decided, as if my presence there was a mistake I needed to correct immediately. "You turn around and go home, honey." There was no warmth in the words, despite the endearment. It wasn't kindness. It felt like a boundary being drawn, quiet, firm, unquestionable. When I finally pulled into my driveway, my hands were still shaking. The familiar sight of my house felt surreal, like stepping back into normalcy after brushing against something that didn't belong. I sat in the car for a moment, engine ticking softly as it cooled, replaying the encounter over and over. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that exhaustion and darkness had amplified an ordinary interaction into something eerie. But the memory refused to shrink. Every detail remained sharp. The truck, the blood, the man's unblinking stare. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the house sounded louder. Every passing car made my pulse spike. My mind kept circling the same question. What had I actually stumbled into? Morning light made everything feel less dramatic. Sunlight has a way of washing fear into something manageable. By breakfast, the story sounded almost mundane when I recounted it in my head. A wrong turn. A hunter. A stern stranger telling me to leave. Still, the emotional residue remained. Years have passed. And I still think about that night more often than I'd like to admit. Memory softens many things over time, but not this. The scene returns with startling clarity whenever I drive down an unfamiliar road after dark. I don't claim to know what the truth was. Maybe it truly was nothing more than a hunter field dressing a deer. That's the explanation I hope is right. It's the version of the story that fits neatly into the world I understand. But the feeling, that cold certainty in his voice, the silent warning carried in such simple words, never faded. Sometimes fear doesn't come from what you see. It comes from the sense that you've crossed into a moment you weren't meant to witness. A wrong turn that places you briefly at the edge of something unknown. And even now, when I think back to that clearing, and the man standing in my headlights, I can still hear him, calm, steady, unhurried, telling me exactly what to do. Turn around, go home. I'm grateful I listened. This happened to my aunt when she was 13 years old, back in the late 1980s, a time when kids still walked home from school every day without much worry, when neighborhoods felt familiar, and danger seemed like something that happened somewhere else. For her, that sense of safety changed in a matter of seconds, and the memory stayed with her long after childhood should have faded into something softer. She lived in a quiet area where the streets formed a simple T-shaped layout. It was the kind of neighborhood where routines were predictable. Every afternoon she walked home with the same friend, their backpacks bouncing lightly as they talked about school, weekend plans, and whatever drama mattered to 13-year-olds. Their walk followed the same pattern each day. They would travel together until they reached the intersection where their routes split, one heading left, the other right. It was such an ordinary ritual that neither of them ever thought twice about it. On that particular afternoon, nothing felt unusual at first. The air was calm, the streets mostly empty, and the rhythm of the day felt reassuringly normal. They reached the intersection, laughed about something small, and parted ways like they always did. Her friend headed toward her street, and my aunt continued alone, expecting the final stretch home to be uneventful. She had barely gone a short distance when she heard the slow rumble of a car approaching behind her. Cars passed through the neighborhood all the time, so she didn't immediately think anything of it. But this vehicle didn't continue past her. Instead, it rolled forward and matched her walking pace. She turned her head and saw a black station wagon beside her, old, worn down, the paint dull and scratched like it had lived a long, rough life. The window on the driver's side slid down, and the man inside leaned slightly toward her. He appeared to be in his 40s, maybe older. He was balding, with a thick mustache that gave his face a stern, tired look. At first glance, he didn't seem frantic or aggressive. He wore a neutral expression, the kind that might belong to someone asking for directions. That familiarity is what made her pause instead of immediately running. In a casual tone, he asked if she knew how to get to a specific part of town. It was an area she wasn't familiar with. She didn't have friends who lived there, and she hadn't spent much time in that direction. Trying to be polite, she told him she didn't know. While she was answering, something in his posture caught her attention. Her eyes shifted downward for just a moment, a glance she didn't consciously plan. And that's when her brain struggled to process what she was seeing. The man was masturbating while he talked to her. For a split second, her mind froze. It didn't make sense. The situation felt disconnected from reality, like her brain rejected the image before finally accepting it. When the realization hit, it came with a rush of shock and revulsion that made her stomach drop. She snapped her gaze back up, and in that instant, their eyes met. He knew she had seen what he was doing. His expression changed, not into anger or panic, but into something colder, something that suggested he'd been caught, but didn't feel remorse. So, without another word, he pressed the gas pedal and sped away, and the station wagon lurched forward, tires humming loudly against the pavement as it disappeared down the street. Adrenaline surged through her body. Instinct overrode fear, and she ran after the car, hoping to catch the license plate number. Her backpack bounced wildly against her shoulders as she sprinted, but the car was already too far ahead. Within seconds, it vanished around a corner. Frustration and disbelief crashed into her all at once. She stood there breathing hard, feeling exposed and shaken. This wasn't just a strange encounter. It was deeply violating. The man had taken something ordinary and twisted it into a moment she couldn't immediately shake. Remember, this was the late 1980s. There were no smartphones to pull out, no instant photos to capture evidence. Once the car was gone, it was gone. She ran the rest of the way home, her thoughts racing faster than her feet. When she burst through the door, her mother immediately knew something was wrong. Between shaky breaths, my aunt explained what had happened. Saying it out loud made the memory feel even more real, and embarrassment crept in alongside fear. She felt ashamed despite knowing she'd done nothing wrong, a reaction many people have when confronted with something so invasive. Her mother didn't hesitate. She told her daughter they needed to inform her father. That suggestion alone made my aunt want to disappear into the floor. The idea of repeating the story was mortifying. But her mother understood the seriousness of the situation and insisted. Her father reacted exactly as you'd expect, protective, furious, and determined to do something. He contacted the police immediately. Officers took a report, asked questions, and tried to gather whatever details they could. The car's color, the man's appearance, the location, the time. But without a license plate or additional witnesses, their options were limited. The case went nowhere. Life moved on in the way it always does, but the incident left a mark. My aunt became more cautious, walking alone. The neighborhood that once felt safe now carried an undercurrent of uncertainty. It was a harsh lesson learned too young, that danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it pulls up beside you in broad daylight wearing a calm face. A couple of years later, when she was older, she had a friend who lived in the same area the man had asked about. One afternoon, the two of them were riding their bikes through that neighborhood, laughing and enjoying the freedom that comes with being teenagers on wheels. Then she saw it. Parked along the street was a black station wagon, worn, scratched, unmistakably familiar. Her stomach tightened as recognition hit. Even after years, the image hadn't faded. She pointed it out to her friend, her voice sharp with urgency. "That's the car," she said. Adrenaline took over again. They pedaled toward it, hoping to finally catch the license plate number. Their tires whirred loudly against the pavement as they closed the distance. But just as before, timing betrayed them. The driver noticed the movement, the attention, and the car pulled away before they could get a clear look. They chased it as far as they could, legs burning, hearts pounding. But a bicycle can't outrun a car. Once again, the station wagon disappeared. The second encounter confirmed what she'd always suspected. The man wasn't just a one-time threat passing through. He was part of the landscape, lurking somewhere in the same area where kids lived and walked and trusted the world to behave normally. That realization was deeply unsettling. As the years passed, stories of similar encounters surfaced, not always connected to the same vehicle or individual, but part of a larger pattern that feels disturbingly common. Every generation seems to inherit its share of people, willing to cross boundaries and prey on moments of vulnerability. For my aunt, the memory never fully faded. It became one of those stories she shared not for shock value, but as a reminder, a cautionary tale about awareness, an instinct, and the importance of speaking up even when embarrassment tries to silence you. Looking back, what stands out most isn't just the creep's actions, it's her response. She trusted her instincts. She ran. She told her parents. She tried to gather evidence. She did everything a scared 13-year-old could reasonably do in a situation that no child should have to navigate. The experience stole a piece of innocence, but it also strengthened her understanding of boundaries and personal safety. It's a story that still carries weight, not because it was dramatic or cinematic, but because it was real, sudden, and deeply unsettling. And unfortunately, it's a reminder that while neighborhoods change and technology advances, the need for awareness and protection remains constant. Some dangers are loud and obvious. Others pull up quietly, or asking for directions, hiding their intentions behind a calm voice, waiting for someone young and unsuspecting to answer. That's why the story stays with her, not as fear, but as vigilance. A lesson learned on an ordinary afternoon that turned into something she would never forget. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. This happened around 2012, during a time when my family and I were settling into what we hoped would be a fresh start. We had just moved to Lethbridge, Alberta, into a rental house owned by an older couple. At first glance, the place seemed ordinary. Modest, quiet, the kind of house you'd pass without a second thought. But from the very beginning, something about it felt off. It wasn't dramatic or obvious. It was subtle, like a quiet tension in the air that you couldn't explain but couldn't ignore either. Moving into a new home always carries a strange energy. Everything feels unfamiliar. New sounds, new shadows, new rhythms. Most people chalk that discomfort up to adjustment, and that's what I tried to tell myself. But nights in that house never felt normal. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. There was a downstairs neighbor who rented part of the house. She was friendly enough, and we exchanged casual greetings when crossing paths. Nothing about her hinted at anything unusual. Life seemed typical, but the nights were a different story. I started sleeping on the couch in the living room instead of my bedroom. I told my family it was because I liked falling asleep to the TV, which was partly true. The real reason was harder to put into words. My bedroom felt unsettling in a way that made my skin crawl. The living room, with its constant glow from the television, felt safer, like the light kept something at bay. Most nights, I would stay up late watching whatever happened to be on. The house would settle into stillness around midnight, my family asleep, the streets outside quiet. That's when I started hearing it. Footsteps. At first they were faint, and the kind of sound you question. A creak, a shift. Old houses make noises, I told myself. Wood expands and contracts. Pipes rattle. It's normal. But these weren't random creaks. They were deliberate, rhythmic, measured. Step, step, step. The sound would begin in the living room area and continue toward the kitchen, like someone pacing with purpose. The first time it happened, I muted the TV and held my breath. The footsteps continued, steady and unmistakable. My heart pounded as I scanned the dark hallway, expecting to see someone standing there. Nothing. I told myself it had to be my imagination. Maybe the sound was traveling from outside. Maybe I was overtired. But the next night, it happened again. And the night after that. The pattern became disturbingly consistent. Almost every night between 1 a.m. and 2:30 a.m., the footsteps would start their slow circuit. The repetition made it impossible to ignore. I began timing them without meaning to. I'd glance at the clock, already knowing what I was about to hear. And right on cue, the pacing would begin. Living room to kitchen, kitchen to living room. No variation, no pause, just movement. Eventually, I mentioned it to the downstairs neighbor in casual conversation. I expected her to laugh it off or blame the house's age. Instead, her face changed. "You hear them too?" she asked. That moment sent a cold wave through me. She explained that she'd been hearing footsteps above her late at night, the same time window I experienced them. She assumed it was someone in our family getting up for a snack or walking around. But when I told her everyone upstairs was asleep, her expression shifted from curiosity to unease. That confirmation shook me. It meant the sounds weren't just in my head. Someone else heard them, through the floor, matching the same timing and pattern. When I told my mom, she listened calmly. To her credit, she didn't dismiss me outright. She believed I was hearing something, but her reaction was surprisingly relaxed. She suggested it might just be a spirit, not malicious, just lingering energy. In her view, it wasn't something to fear. Houses have histories, she said. Sometimes they leave impressions. Her calmness helped a little, but it didn't erase the dread I felt every night when the clock crept toward 1 a.m. I decided I wanted proof, something tangible to confirm what I was experiencing. Around that time, I had just bought a digital camera. It wasn't anything fancy, but to me it felt like a tool, a way to capture what my ears insisted was real. One night I stayed up deliberately, camera within arm's reach. The house grew quiet. The TV flickered softly, casting moving shadows across the walls. My nerves were tight with anticipation. Then, right on schedule, the footsteps began. They were louder than usual, easily audible over the television. My hands trembled as I grabbed the camera. I pointed it toward the area where the sound felt strongest, the open space between the living room and kitchen, and snapped a series of photos in quick succession. Flash, click, flash, click. Each burst of light felt like I was challenging something invisible to reveal itself. When the footsteps faded, I sat there breathing hard, adrenaline buzzing in my ears. I scrolled through the images, and most of them looked ordinary, grainy shots of an empty room. But then I saw it. In 3 consecutive photos, a purple mist hovered in the air roughly 2 feet away from where I'd been sitting. It wasn't a reflection or blur. It had shape, a swirling, smoky presence suspended in space. My fear transformed into a strange excitement. There it was, proof, validation. I wasn't imagining things. Something was there. I wish I still had those pictures. Over the years, they were lost, deleted, misplaced, casualties of changing devices. But I remember them vividly. The color, the position, the way the mist seemed to glow faintly against the darkness. After that, the footsteps didn't feel as terrifying. They were still unsettling, but knowing I'd captured something gave me a sense of control. I leaned back into the couch, trying to relax, letting the TV fill the room with sound. It was around 2:45 a.m. when the atmosphere shifted. The footsteps were still making their rounds, but I'd grown used to them. My attention drifted back to the show I was watching. The room was otherwise pitch black, the television the only source of light. Then the TV shut off. Not a gradual fade, not a click. It just died, plunging the room into total darkness. And before I could even react, the screen flickered back to life. But it wasn't my show. The image that filled the screen froze the air in my lungs. A flaming skull burned against a black backdrop. A vision that looked like something pulled straight from a nightmare. Fire licked around the skull's edges, casting an unnatural glow. Behind it stretched a dark, hellish landscape that didn't resemble any broadcast I'd ever seen. It wasn't static. It wasn't distortion. It was a clear, deliberate image. I couldn't move. My body locked in place as fear surged through me. Every instinct screamed to look away, but I couldn't. The skull seemed to stare directly through the screen, through me, like it knew I was watching. Seconds felt like minutes. The air felt heavy, pressing against my chest. I was aware of my heartbeat pounding in my ears, of sweat forming on my skin despite the cold room. The image stayed there for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably around a minute. long enough to burn itself into my memory, long enough to make me question everything I thought I understood about reality. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the image vanished. The TV returned to the show I'd been watching, as if nothing had happened. No static, no interruption. Just normal programming continuing mid-scene. The contrast was jarring. One moment I was staring into something that felt impossibly wrong, and the next I was back to ordinary television. The room looked the same. The couch felt the same, but I wasn't the same. I sat there shaking, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a glitch, a corrupted signal, some bizarre broadcast error, but none of those explanations felt big enough to contain what I'd experienced. The footsteps had stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed frozen on the couch until morning light crept through the windows, waiting for reality to feel stable again. Even when the sun rose, the memory clung to me like smoke. To this day, that image remains vivid, sharper than many real memories from that time. I can still picture the flames, the hollow eyes, the sense that something had crossed a boundary between unseen and seen. Years have passed since we left that house. Life moved on. The experience became something I rarely talk about, partly because I know how it sounds. But the feeling of that night, the footsteps, the mist, the skull, never fully faded. Whether it was something paranormal, a trick of technology, or my mind under stress, I can't say with certainty. What I do know is how real it felt. The fear wasn't imagined. The sounds weren't imagined. The moment burned itself into my memory with a clarity that refuses to blur. Even now, sometimes when a house settles at night or a floor creaks unexpectedly, I feel that old tension rise. A reminder of a time when the line between the ordinary and the unexplainable felt paper thin. And somewhere deep in my mind, that flaming skull still flickers, a silent echo of a night I will never forget. And half-done tasks. And all you want is to get home, shower, and sleep. The streetlights cast long yellow streaks across the pavement, and the air outside looked still, like the whole town had paused for the night. She had taken this route countless times before. It was familiar, safe, and predictable, or at least it always had been. As she drove through a quieter stretch of road lined with old trees and shuttered shops, her headlights caught movement ahead. Standing near the curb was a woman dressed entirely in black. The figure looked strangely out of place, not because people don't walk at night, but because of how still she stood. One arm was slightly raised, signaling for a ride. At first, my teacher's friend felt a small jolt of hesitation. Something about the scene felt off. The woman didn't wave frantically like someone stranded might. She didn't step forward. She simply stood there, calm and patient, as if she knew the car would stop. For a few seconds, my teacher's friend debated with herself. It was late, yeah, but the woman didn't appear threatening. Maybe she needed help. Maybe her phone had died. Maybe she was just trying to get home like everyone else. Compassion won over caution. She slowed down, pulled to the side of the road, and rolled down the window slightly. "Do you need a ride?" she asked. The woman nodded slowly. Even under the dim light, her face was difficult to make out clearly. There was something shadowed about her features, like the darkness clung too closely. She opened the back door and slipped into the seat without saying a word. The door clicked shut softly, too softly, and the silence inside the car thickened. Trying to be polite, my teacher's friend asked where she was headed. No answer. She assumed the woman hadn't heard her and asked again. Still nothing. The air inside the car felt colder than it should have been. and an uneasy sensation began to crawl up her spine. She told herself she was imagining things. Maybe the woman was tired. Maybe she didn't speak much English. The human mind is good at inventing logical explanations when it wants comfort. Minutes passed. The road stretched endlessly ahead, illuminated only by the headlights and the occasional flicker of street lamps. The silence became heavy, pressing against her ears. Finally, curiosity mixed with discomfort pushed her to glance into the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. Her breath caught in her throat. A cold wave rushed through her chest. That wasn't possible. She hadn't heard the door open. She hadn't stopped the car. For a split second, her brain refused to process what her eyes were seeing. She twisted around in her seat, confirming what the mirror showed. No one was there. Her heart began hammering violently. Panic surged through her veins. Every instinct screamed at her to get out of there, to drive faster, to escape whatever had just happened. She turned back to the road, and that's when her eyes flicked to the mirror again. This time, a face stared back at her. It wasn't sitting in the seat like a normal passenger. It was too close to the mirror, filling the reflection with something grotesque and distorted. The features looked wrong, stretched in unnatural ways, eyes wide and hollow, mouth twisted into a shape that didn't resemble any human expression. It was the kind of face that doesn't just scare you. It freezes you, locking your muscles while your mind screams. A sound tore from her throat, half gasp, half cry. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel as adrenaline surged through her body. She forced herself to focus on the road, pressing the accelerator harder than she ever had. She didn't dare look back again. Every second felt like an eternity. Her ears rang with the thunder of her heartbeat, drowning out everything else. When she finally reached a brighter, busier street, she pulled over abruptly. Her entire body trembled. She checked the back seat again, this time slowly, cautiously. It was empty, completely empty. No sign anyone had ever been there. She sat there for a long time, trying to breathe, trying to convince herself it had been stress, exhaustion, a hallucination. But the memory of that face burned into her mind with terrifying clarity. You don't imagine something like that. You don't feel fear that deep from nothing. She somehow made it home, but sleep never came. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the mirror. She saw that face. The next day, my teacher received a call asking her to visit her friend at the hospital. When she arrived, she barely recognized her. The woman looked pale and shaken, eyes sunken from lack of rest. Her hands trembled as she tried to recount what had happened. The words tumbled out in fragments. The woman in black, the empty seat, the reflection. She wasn't telling the story for drama. She was reliving it. The doctors called it trauma, severe psychological shock. They suggested rest, therapy, grounding techniques. But nothing seemed to ease her fear. She became jumpy, paranoid, constantly checking mirrors, windows, reflections. She insisted the face wasn't just a trick of her mind. It had followed her. It watched her. Friends and family tried to be supportive, but skepticism crept in. Some assumed stress had broken her nerves. Others thought she was exaggerating. When she repeated the story, people smiled politely, exchanged glances, and changed the subject. Being dismissed hurt almost as much as the memory itself. Weeks turned into months. Instead of healing, she withdrew. She avoided driving at night. She kept lights on while sleeping. She spoke less, as if afraid that saying too much would make something return. My teacher visited whenever she could, watching her friend slowly become a shadow of the lively person she once was. Then one day, the calls stopped being about appointments and check-ins. My teacher learned that her friend was gone. The official explanation was vague. complications tied to her deteriorating mental state, stress and trauma that had spiraled beyond control, but those close to her couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something deeper had broken inside her the night she looked into that mirror. Even years later, my teacher said the memory of her friend's fear stayed with her. It wasn't just the story that haunted her. It was the certainty in her friend's eyes when she described what she saw. That wasn't the look of someone inventing a tale. It was the look of someone who had stared into something they couldn't understand, and something that never truly left them. And sometimes, on quiet nights, when the roads feel too empty and reflections linger a little too long, my teacher admits she still avoids looking in the rearview mirror for more than a second. Just in case some stories aren't meant to be remembered, only survived. For as long as I can remember, my mom has been a practical person. She isn't the type to jump to supernatural conclusions or read hidden meanings into everyday events. She believes in routines, logic, and the idea that most things have a reasonable explanation if you look hard enough. That's why the story she told me about a recurring nightmare has always stuck with me. It doesn't fit neatly into her usual way of thinking, and maybe that's what makes it feel so unsettling and strangely meaningful. Even now, the dreams started long before she met my dad, back when her life was completely separate from the family she would eventually marry into. She was young, living her normal day-to-day life, when she began having the same nightmare over and over again. It wasn't vague or symbolic in the way dreams often are. It was vivid, detailed, and disturbingly consistent. In the dream, she would see two men in a car. One was clearly older. Not elderly, but mature. Someone with a presence that suggested experience and authority. The other was younger, energetic, almost protective in the way he moved. They weren't strangers in the abstract dream sense. They felt like real people with weight and identity, even though she didn't recognize their faces. The car they were driving stood out in a way dream details rarely do. It was a deep blue, the kind of color that seems darker under shadow but flashes bright when light hits it. That blue burned itself into her memory. Even when she woke up, the color lingered in her mind like an afterimage. The dream always unfolded the same way. The men were driving, talking, or laughing. She could never remember the words, only the feeling of normalcy. Then something shifted. The atmosphere tightened. A sense of impending danger filled the space. The car lost control, metal twisted, glass shattered, and the dream ended in a violent crash that left her jolted awake with her heart racing. At first, she dismissed it. Everyone has nightmares. Stress, imagination, random brain activity. There are plenty of explanations. But the dream didn't fade. It returned night after night, sometimes with weeks of quiet in between, only to come back exactly as it had before. Same men, same blue car, same terrible ending. What unsettled her wasn't just the repetition. It was the clarity. Dreams usually blur around the edges. Details shift. Faces change. But this nightmare stayed precise. Every time she woke, she felt like she had witnessed something rather than imagined it. Over time, the emotional impact of the dream seeped into her waking life. She found herself uneasy around blue cars. It wasn't a full-blown fear, more like a quiet resistance she couldn't justify logically. If someone suggested riding in one, she felt a flicker of discomfort. If she was choosing between vehicles, she avoided blue without consciously deciding to. She knew it didn't make sense. She wasn't superstitious. She didn't believe dreams predicted the future. But the feeling lingered anyway, a subtle thread of tension tied to a color. Eventually, life moved forward. she met my dad. They built a relationship, blended routines, and became part of each other's families. The dream faded into the background. It still surfaced occasionally, but less frequently. She chalked it up to memory, playing tricks, or the brain recycling old imagery. Then came the day everything lined up in a way she couldn't ignore. My uncle, my dad's brother, and my grandfather were traveling together. It was supposed to be an ordinary drive. No special occasion, no reason to suspect anything unusual. Somewhere along that route, something went terribly wrong. The details of the accident aren't what matter most in the retelling. What matters is that the crash was severe enough that they almost didn't survive. When the phone call came, panic spread quickly through the family. Hospitals, updates, long stretches of waiting, the kind of hours that stretch endlessly while everyone holds their breath. Thankfully, they pulled through. Injured, shaken, but alive. When my mom learned what had happened, her first reaction was relief. But that relief was immediately followed by a cold realization that made her stomach drop. They had been driving a blue car, not just any blue, a shade eerily close to the one burned into her memory from the nightmare. And the passengers, an older man and a younger man. The parallel hit her all at once. The dream she'd carried for years, the one she dismissed as meaningless, mirrored what had just happened with unsettling precision. These were people she hadn't even known when the dream first began. Their faces, their voices, their existence had been completely outside her world at the time. Yet somehow, the emotional shape of the nightmare fit the real event in a way that defied easy explanation. She didn't tell anyone right away. Part of her worried it would sound dramatic or irrational. And she spent days turning the coincidence over in her mind, testing it against logic. Was her memory exaggerating details to match the accident? Had she unconsciously reshaped the dream after the fact? But the strongest piece of evidence sat in her emotions. The relief she felt wasn't just about their survival. It was paired with a strange sense of closure. Because after the accident, the nightmare stopped. Completely. Weeks passed. Months. The dream never returned. The absence felt almost louder than its presence had been. It was as if something unresolved had finally reached its conclusion. Over time, she began to share the story in quiet moments. Not as proof of anything supernatural, but as one of those experiences that resists neat categorization. She didn't claim foresight. She didn't insist it meant anything cosmic. She simply acknowledged that it happened, and that it changed how she viewed the boundary between coincidence and intuition. Years rolled on, and life softened the edges of the memory. Ironically, the very thing she once avoided became part of her everyday routine. Today, she drives a blue car without hesitation. Sometimes she even borrows mine, also blue, with no trace of the unease she once felt. When I asked her about it recently, she smiled in that thoughtful way people do when revisiting something they still can't fully explain. She told me she doesn't fear the color anymore because whatever the dream represented feels finished. Whether it was coincidence, subconscious processing, or something stranger, it ran its course. What fascinates me most isn't the idea of prophecy or fate. It's how the human mind holds on to patterns, how meaning emerges from the places where memory and emotion overlap. My mom remains the same grounded person she's always been. She doesn't live her life guided by omens or symbols. But that story sits quietly in her history. A reminder that sometimes experiences don't need a tidy explanation to feel significant. The dream came uninvited, repeated with impossible clarity, and vanished the moment reality echoed its shape. Maybe it was chance aligning in a way that felt profound. Maybe it was her brain weaving threads we'll never fully understand. Whatever the truth is, the nightmare no longer visits her. The blue car is just a car. The road ahead is ordinary again. And yet somewhere in the back of our minds, the story lingers, not as fear, but as curiosity. A small reminder that the line between coincidence and meaning is sometimes thinner than we expect, and that even the most practical people can carry a mystery they never quite solve. My mother's side of the family comes from a place that, even today, feels far removed from the modern world. Back then, it felt even more so. They lived in a small community deep in the state of Pará in Brazil, surrounded by the Amazon rainforest. Not the distant, romanticized jungle people imagine from documentaries, but the real thing. Dense, humid, alive in ways that felt beautiful and threatening at the same time. Getting there wasn't simple. You couldn't just drive in. There were no roads cutting through the forest back then. To reach the town, you had to travel for hours by boat, gliding along the river while the jungle pressed in from both sides. The trip itself felt like crossing into another reality, the sounds changing, the air thickening, civilization slowly fading behind you. Today, there's a small landing strip nearby, but at the time, the river was the lifeline. Everything arrived by water, and everything left the same way. The town, calling it a city always felt generous, was home to fewer than 10,000 people. It existed in a delicate balance with the environment. During the rainy season, the river swelled and spilled over its banks, flooding entire sections of the settlement. This wasn't treated as a disaster. It was simply life. People built their homes on thick wooden pillars to rise above the water. Narrow walkways connected house to house, forming suspended streets where daily routines continued even as the river flowed beneath. When the waters receded, the mud below teemed with strange, deformed crabs skittering through the muck. When the water was high, you could sometimes see fish weaving between the stilts. River dolphins would surface in the distance, graceful and almost playful, reminders that not everything sharing the water meant harm. But there were other shapes, too. Crocodiles sliding just below the surface, massive snakes rumored to move like shadows. The jungle never let you forget that you were living on its terms. That environment shaped the people as much as the river shaped the land. Faith and folklore blended seamlessly there. Catholic traditions lived side by side with older indigenous beliefs, stories passed down through generations until myth and memory felt indistinguishable. European legends that traveled across the ocean merged with local lore. You'd hear about creatures that sounded familiar, werewolves, spirits, forest guardians. But they were never quite the same as the stories told elsewhere. In some tales, the beast wasn't a wolf at all, but a monstrous wild pig roaming under the moon. From a distance, these stories might seem quaint or exaggerated, but hearing them told by locals, deep in the rainforest at night while the jungle hummed around you, changed everything. Darkness carries weight in a place like that. Every sound feels intentional. Every silence feels like it's watching. My uncle grew up in that world. He worked at the first bakery in town, a small but important place where people gathered each morning for fresh bread. His job required discipline. He woke long before sunrise because the town itself woke with the sun. By the time the first light touched the river, people expected warm bread waiting. To reach the bakery, he walked the same route 6 days a week. The path traced the outer edge of town, here where houses gave way to dense forests. Everyone understood the risk, The jungle didn't stop at the boundary. Jaguars and powerful spotted predators, locals called onça pintada, prowled those woods. They were nocturnal hunters, silent and efficient. My uncle's walk happened during the thin hour when night hadn't fully released its grip. Still, routine breeds familiarity. Familiarity dulls fear. He made that walk countless times without incident. Until one morning, he didn't arrive. It was raining heavily that day, the kind of steady, soaking rain that turns the world gray. He left home before dawn, like always. Hours passed, and when he didn't show up at the bakery, concern began to spread. By midday, people were searching. Family members retraced his route. Neighbors combed the edges of the forest. They called his name into the trees, their voices swallowed by the rain. Nothing. No signs of struggle. No footprints distinct enough to follow. Just wet earth and the relentless sound of rainfall. As daylight faded, dread settled over the family. In a place where the jungle is never far, absence carries heavy implications. People whispered possibilities. An animal encounter, a fall, getting lost. The forest is vast enough to erase a person if it chooses. Night came. He still hadn't returned. At dawn the next morning, while the family sat in exhausted silence, he appeared. He walked into the shared yard where my grandmother and her children had built their homes close together. At first, relief hit like a wave. He was alive, standing, whole. But the relief quickly gave way to unease. He looked emptied. His skin was pale, drained of color in a way that didn't match simple fatigue. His eyes held a distant fear, as if he had seen something that hadn't finished echoing inside him. When they rushed to him, asking where he'd been, what happened, he flinched at the questions. The fear sharpened. His body tensed like he was bracing against something unseen. He didn't answer. Hours passed with him sitting in silence, breathing shallowly, avoiding eye contact. Every attempt to speak about the missing day made his expression tighten. Eventually, when the trembling eased enough for words, he told them only one thing. Don't ask about it. And they didn't. In that town, silence carried its own meaning. People understood that some experiences didn't belong in conversation. Whether out of respect, fear, or cultural instinct, the family honored his request. Life resumed its rhythm. The bakery reopened. The jungle remained where it had always been. But the unanswered question lingered like humidity in the air. More than 30 years have passed since that day. He never offered an explanation. No confession slipped out during late-night talks. No story softened with time. The event remains sealed, preserved in silence. Growing up hearing this story, I learned that in places where nature dominates, the line between the explainable and the unexplainable feels thinner. The forest holds real dangers, predators, terrain, weather, but it also carries a psychological weight. When people disappear or encounter something they refuse to describe, imagination fills the void. Did he become lost in the rain and wander for hours? Did he stumble upon an animal or something equally terrifying? Did exhaustion and fear blur his memory into something unspeakable? No one knows, and perhaps no one truly wants to. My grandmother, who lived to the remarkable age of 102, carried the old wisdom of that place. She would say it casually, like advice about tying your shoes. When it's raining in the forest and you hear someone calling your name, don't answer. No matter how strong the urge feels, don't respond. She never elaborated. She didn't need to. In her tone was the quiet certainty of someone repeating a rule learned through generations, a rule born from experiences that were never fully explained. Whether you interpret it as folklore, survival instinct, or something deeper, the message carried weight. In the rainforest, not every voice is meant to be followed. Not every mystery demands resolution. And somewhere in that silence, in the unanswered questions about my uncle's missing day, the jungle keeps its secrets, humming patiently as it always has, reminding those who live near it that some stories are better left untouched. My brother and I didn't plan anything dramatic that night. It was one of those evenings where life just piled up a little too high for both of us, and talking felt like the only way to unload it. We'd done that before, long drives with no destination, just letting the road absorb whatever stress we were carrying. There's something about being in a moving car that makes conversations easier. You don't have to look at each other. Words come out smoother. Silence feels comfortable instead of awkward. So we got in the car and started driving. The night air was cool, the roads mostly empty. We stopped at a gas station like we usually did, filled the tank, grabbed a couple of bottles of water, stretched our legs for a minute. It felt like the beginning of a normal, uneventful drive. My brother mentioned a road nearby he'd never taken before. It curved off into a darker stretch of hills, one of those side roads that promises quiet and open space. Since the whole point of the drive was to talk and clear our heads, exploring sounded perfect. We turned onto the road and let the conversation pick back up. The further we went, the quieter everything became. Streetlights faded behind us. The hum of the engine and our voices filled the car. It wasn't eerie, just isolated. The kind of silence that feels peaceful when you're with someone you trust. We drove maybe 4 miles in, talking about work frustrations and the usual life stuff, when the car made a sound that cut right through the moment. It was subtle at first. A hesitation, a small stutter in the engine. My brother frowned and eased off the gas. The car responded with another strange noise, not loud, but wrong. Anyone who's driven long enough knows the difference between normal mechanical chatter and something you shouldn't ignore. The mood shifted instantly. Conversation stopped. We both listened. The engine sputtered again. He didn't like it. I could see the calculation happening in his head. Distance from help, unfamiliar road, nighttime. Without overthinking it, he slowed down and made a careful turn to head back the way we came. The car felt off, sluggish, like it was fighting itself. Every new sound made us tense a little more. The ride back felt longer than the drive in. We didn't talk much. My brother kept his focus on the road, monitoring every vibration and flicker of the dashboard. The gas gauge didn't catch my attention at the time. I assumed we were fine. We had literally just filled up. When the gas station lights came back into view, relief washed over me. Civilization. Brightness. Normalcy. My brother pulled in and parked, saying he wanted a drink before checking under the hood. The engine cut off with a tired shudder. That's when he noticed the gauge. "Hey, that's weird," he said. I leaned forward to look. The needle sat buried at empty. Not low, not near empty, completely drained. We both stared at it for a second, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. We had filled the tank minutes before heading down that road. There was no way we burned through an entire tank in under 10 miles. No leak smell, no puddle beneath the car. Nothing that explained it. Confusion turned into a slow, creeping unease. My brother stepped out first. I followed, the cool air hitting my face. The gas station was quiet. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and distant highway noise. He walked around the car, and I saw him freeze mid-step. "What the hell?" he said quietly. I came around the side and stopped cold. The white paint of the car was smeared with handprints. Brown, muddy handprints. Dozens of them, layered and overlapping across the doors, windows, trunk. Some were small, some looked larger. They weren't random smudges. They were clear impressions, fingers and palms pressed into the surface like someone, or multiple someones, had dragged their hands along the car. It looked like the vehicle had been surrounded. My brain tried to rationalize it immediately. Mud from somewhere, kids messing around, but the prints were everywhere. Too many, too deliberate. And the strangest part was that neither of us had noticed anything like this when we stopped earlier. The car had been clean. We stood there in silence, scanning the empty station lot like we expected someone to step forward and explain it. No one did. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, indifferent to whatever had just happened. My brother grabbed paper towels from the station bathroom and started wiping one of the prints. It smeared easily. Fresh dirt. Not dried. Not old. That realization made my stomach tighten. These marks hadn't been sitting there long. We filled the tank again. It accepted gas like nothing was wrong. No warning lights. No error messages. Just a normal refill after a situation that felt anything but normal. The drive home was quiet. We kept glancing at the mirrors, half expecting to see something following us. Nothing did. The road behaved like any other road. Traffic lights cycled. Cars passed. The world continued as if we hadn't just stepped sideways into something we couldn't explain. Later, curiosity, or maybe a need for answers, pushed us to research the area we'd explored. We weren't looking for ghosts or horror stories. We wanted something concrete, a mechanical explanation, a local prank, anything grounded in reality. Instead, we found history. Old records described the land around that road as part of a burial and detention area connected to early immigrant communities, a place where people had been mistreated in brutal ways. Accounts mentioned burning, hanging, even live burials. It wasn't widely known, no big signs, no tourist markers, just fragments of history buried in archives and local accounts. Reading it didn't prove anything supernatural. History is full of dark chapters. Land carries stories whether we know them or not. But the timing, the location, the unexplained gas drain, and those handprints, all of it settled into our minds in a way that logic couldn't easily dissolve. We didn't jump to conclusions. We didn't claim we'd encountered anything paranormal. But the experience left a mark. It was one of those moments where coincidence stacks up in a way that makes you pause and reconsider how much you truly understand about the spaces you move through every day. The car never had another issue like that. No sudden gas loss, no mysterious prints. Mechanically, it behaved perfectly fine afterward. That almost made it stranger, like whatever glitch we experienced existed in isolation. A single event with no repeat performance. Sometimes we still talk about that night. Not in a fearful way, but with the same quiet curiosity we felt standing under those gas station lights. We revisit the details, testing them against logic again and again. Could we have missed something obvious? Did stress warp our perception? Was there a mundane explanation hiding in plain sight? Maybe. But neither of us has ever found one that fits cleanly. What stays with me most isn't the mystery itself. It's the feeling. That moment of standing beside the car, staring at those handprints, realizing something had happened outside our understanding. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just deeply, unsettlingly strange. And sometimes when I pass that stretch of road now, I catch myself glancing toward it. Not out of fear, more like respect. A quiet acknowledgement that some places carry layers we don't always see. History, memory, coincidence, all intersecting in ways that can make an ordinary night feel anything but ordinary. We went out for a simple drive to clear our heads. We came back with a story neither of us can fully explain, and maybe that's what makes it linger. I met one of the best friends I would ever have in the most ordinary modern way, through a video game lobby on the internet. At the time, he went by the name Dova Carey, a username pulled straight from his obsession with Skyrim. He was a computer science major, a proud nerd in the best sense of the word, and the kind of guy who could turn any conversation into something fun. I didn't know it then, but that random match would introduce me to someone who would become a constant presence in my life. His real name was Cody, and over time, what started as casual gaming turned into a friendship that felt deeper and more genuine than many relationships I'd built face to face. Cody was ridiculously good at League of Legends. Watching him play was like watching someone speak a language fluently that I was still struggling to learn. He breezed through ranks most people grinded endlessly to reach. While I scraped by as a mediocre support, he dominated games without breaking a sweat. He had mastered every ADC champion to a level that felt unfair, yet he never made me feel like dead weight. He didn't play to show off. He played because he loved the game and loved the people he met through it. I rode his coattails shamelessly, and he never minded. Winning with friends mattered more to him than stats. But what really bonded us wasn't the game. It was timing. I had recently been diagnosed with manic depression, and my world felt unstable in ways I didn't yet understand. Nights were the hardest. My thoughts would spiral. Sleep felt impossible, and loneliness hit with a weight that was hard to describe. Cody somehow always showed up during those moments. We would queue for games, talk about everything and nothing, and he had this calm, grounded way of putting things into perspective. He never minimized what I was feeling, but he also didn't let me drown in it. He became an anchor, someone steady when everything else felt unpredictable. As the months passed, our friendship expanded beyond the screen. Messages turned into calls into long conversations about life, goals, fears, and dumb jokes that only made sense to us. There was a natural trust there. Eventually, the idea of meeting in person didn't feel strange. It felt overdue. I was older, working, and in a position to make the trip happen. So I bought a plane ticket to Virginia to meet the guy who had become such an important part of my life. Walking out of the airport, I was nervous in a way I hadn't expected. Internet friendships can feel surreal when you bring them into the physical world. But the moment Cody stepped out of the driver's seat of his girlfriend's car and walked toward me, that anxiety disappeared. He was taller than I imagined, smiling in that familiar way I'd seen through webcams. Instead of awkward introductions, I pulled him into a hug without thinking. It felt natural, like greeting family. In that instant, I knew our friendship wasn't confined to screens or headsets. It was real. That trip cemented everything. Cody welcomed me into his life without hesitation. His girlfriend treated me like I'd always been part of the group, and our circle of gaming friends from Virginia quickly became my friends too. We spent days hanging out, laughing, gaming, and sharing stories. It felt effortless. From that point on, our visits became tradition. We made time for each other despite work, distance, and responsibilities. Every trip strengthened the sense that we'd built something rare, a friendship rooted in honesty and shared experience. The last time I saw Cody in person was over Halloween weekend. A bunch of us gathered at his apartment to watch the League World Championships, eat junk food, drink, smoke, and just exist in each other's company. There was nothing extraordinary about the weekend on the surface. No big revelations, no dramatic moments. Just laughter, inside jokes, and the comfort of being around people who understood you. When it came time for me to leave, Cody walked me to the corner store near his place. We grabbed cigarettes and waited together for my Uber. Saying goodbye hit harder than usual. I hugged him and felt that familiar sadness of leaving people who feel like home. At the time, I assumed it was temporary. We'd see each other again soon. That's what friends do. 6 months later, my world shifted in a way I still struggle to put into words. 2 days before everything happened, I'd called Cody upset about something small, but emotionally loud, getting stood up and ghosted by someone I cared about. It felt stupid in hindsight, but in that moment, it hurt. Cody listened the way he always did. He didn't judge or rush me. He just grounded me. His last words to me still echo in my head. Don't sweat it. This is our year. We're going to crush it. And this summer, we'll look back and laugh. That was Cody. Always looking forward. Always pulling you toward hope. The Monday after Easter, I opened Discord and saw a message in one of our servers that made no sense. It said Cody had passed away. My first reaction was a laughter. Not because it was funny, but because my brain rejected the idea outright. I assumed it was a joke about him drinking too much or oversleeping. But when I opened our group chat and saw the flood of messages, my stomach dropped. Something was wrong. The story came in fragments. The night before, Cody had spent the day with his girlfriend. They'd had a normal date night, nothing unusual. When it was time for her to head home and get ready for work, Cody walked her to her car, taking the trash down with him. He told her he loved her and said he'd text when he got back upstairs. That message never came. When she couldn't reach him the next morning, panic set in. His phone pinged from a police station. She drove there expecting confusion, maybe a misunderstanding. Instead, she was led into a room with a detective who told her the unthinkable. After dropping off the trash, Cody had walked toward the corner store, the same one we'd stood outside months earlier. Somewhere along that short stretch, he was shot multiple times and died there on the sidewalk, alone. Hearing that felt like reality tearing open. Cody wasn't reckless. He wasn't involved in anything dangerous. He was just walking to a store he'd visited countless times. The randomness of it was unbearable. A life so full of kindness and humor ended in seconds for reasons no one could clearly explain. Rumors circulated, robbery, mistaken identity, retaliation connected to another incident, but nothing solid ever reached us. The uncertainty only deepened the grief. The weeks that followed were a haze of shock and heartbreak. I flew out for his funeral and stood in front of people who loved him just as fiercely as I did. Speaking about him felt impossible and necessary at the same time. I started a fundraiser to help his mom with funeral costs, and the community responded with overwhelming generosity. It was proof of how many lives Cody had touched. Plans formed to honor him. A beach trip he'd always wanted, time spent with his family, charity efforts connected to his school. Each gesture felt like a way to keep his presence alive. But grief isn't linear. Some days feel manageable. Others hit without warning. A song, a game lobby, a phrase he used to say, they all carry echoes. Losing Cody changed something fundamental in me. It forced me to confront how fragile life is, how quickly someone can be erased from the physical world while their impact remains everywhere. He was the kind of person who made people feel seen, valued, and welcome. That energy doesn't disappear just because he's gone. I still catch myself wanting to message him after a rough day or a good one. I imagine what he'd say. Something honest, encouraging, probably mixed with humor. He had a way of making problems feel temporary and victories feel shared. That's the part I miss most. Not just the friend I game with, but the brother I chose and who chose me back. Nothing about losing him feels fair. It's frightening to accept that someone so full of life can be taken in an instant for reasons that may never be clear. Yet the love he left behind continues to ripple outward. Every fundraiser, every gathering, where every shared memory is proof that Cody mattered deeply. He still does. I wish more than anything that I could sit in a lobby with him one more time, hear his laugh through a headset, and talk about the future like it's guaranteed. But since I can't, I carry what he gave me: perspective, loyalty, and the reminder to show up for people when they need you. That's how I keep him close. And even though my heart is still learning how to live with the absence, I know this much. Friendships like ours don't end when someone is gone. They change form. They become stories, habits, and quiet moments of gratitude. Cody isn't here the way he should be, but the part of him that shaped my life remains steady as ever, reminding me to keep going, just like he always did. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survive things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.